Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ACVB webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very fortunate to have a special guest this evening, Dr. Debra Horwitz. She is going to speak on understanding canine aggression, as you know, so we're delighted you've joined us. Dr. Horwitz is a diplomate of the ACVB. She is a past president of the ACVB, a graduate of Michigan State University College of Veterinary Medicine. She is a frequent lecturer in North America and abroad on behavior. She has also been featured numerous times on both TV and radio. She is a published author of a number of books, articles, and other periodicals. And she has won several awards, including Veterinarian of the Year from Ceva Animal Health and NAVC Small Animal Speaker of the Year. She is also, I can say personally, a stalwart volunteer of the ACVB and just a delight. So we're really pleased to have her. I want to welcome you. You are in listen-only mode. You can put questions into the question box, and Dr. Horwitz will join us at the end and respond to those. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Debra Horwitz, a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, and I'm going to speak with you tonight about canine aggression. My lecture is called Do Dogs Mean to Be Mean? Understanding Canine Aggression. And before we begin, I want to thank the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists for organizing and sponsoring these lectures. I think it's wonderful that we're offering a different way for people to get CE that makes it easy for them to get behavioral CE from their home, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. I often have veterinarians say to me that they didn't get any behavior in veterinary school, and they really don't know any behavior. And I think that that's not really true. If you're a veterinarian and you have 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand, then you know quite a bit about canine behavior, and I bet that most of you in the office and in your offices and in this lecture would be hard-pressed to remember exactly when the last time was you were bitten. And usually that's because if you were bitten at the last minute, you suddenly realize, uh-oh, I did something I shouldn't have, and you got nailed. The reason you know about canine behavior is, number one, you love dogs, you love working with dogs, and you've treated a lot of dogs. When you come in the exam room, you don't just barge in. You go slowly, you turn sideways, you may watch the dog out of the corner of your eye, you talk to the owners, you're very responsive to their body posture and where their ears are and where their tail is. That is behavior. What you might lack is a vocabulary to label that and talk about it with pet owners and with your clinical care staff so that they can learn how to label it and do better with aggressive dogs. We can understand and help aggressive dogs only when we recognize and respond appropriately to their point of view of the situation. We have to look beyond the actual aggressive responses and understand the emotion and the learning behind the actions. We need to use that information to guide our perception, reaction, and intervention. We need to understand the canine perspective on social interactions versus the human perspective on social interactions. We have 2 dogs here. This one is lying on its side. It looks relatively relaxed. Its tail is loose. Its legs are pretty loose. But this dog over here is showing a little bit of a whale eye, a flick of the tongue, and a leg that's lifted up in an appeasement posture. These 2 dogs have a very different attitude about being petted, but to most people, they're the same. And they reach for this dog and wonder why it bites them, and they reach for this one and usually nothing happens. The benefits of understanding the canine point of view are many, and we're going to talk about that in our lecture. We get people to interact appropriately with dogs, which is really important because proper interactions prevent aggression. We foster better and safer interactions with dogs, and we create happier and safer and better bonds between dogs and people. So the key points we're going to talk about today are that aggressive responses are merely a reaction to a social situation. The dog finds itself in a social situation, and for one reason or another, they think they need to use an aggressive response. But dogs show great variability and flexibility in their responses. So one situation that causes a dog to growl, another dog may not growl at that situation. And we know that dogs are very different. And even on any given day, the same dog may respond differently to the same situation. Responses also vary with experience and learning. And past encounters and outcomes shape future responses. And this last one is really important because if encounters are positive and the dog leaves the clinic feeling good about what happened, they're more likely to feel okay the next time they come. If the encounter goes poorly and the dog has to growl and snarl or maybe try to bite or be held down, then the dog is going to remember that as well. And that is part of the impetus behind Fear-Free, trying to make all veterinary visits as benign as we wish them to be. And there are things we can do to help that along. And we're not talking about Fear-Free today, but Fear-Free is directly aimed at decreasing aggressive responses and fear and anxiety in pets that come to the clinic. So what is aggression? Aggression is threat or harmful action directed at one or more individuals. These threats can be vocal, they can be body postures, facial expressions, inhibited attacks, and physically injurious attacks. And they often begin with threats. Another important aspect of dealing with dogs that are aggressive is understanding that medical disease can contribute to irritability and hence aggression. So if somebody comes in and says, you know, my dog has tried to bite me 3 times in the last 3 months, or my dog's becoming more irritable, we really need to do our medical due diligence. That's something that we do very well, and we know how to do that. There are a couple of disorder categories that have been associated with aggression. Among those are gastrointestinal disorders, dogs with poor appetites that have diarrhea frequently and have a lot of borborygmus. Those dogs might not be feeling very well, and that's why they're more irritable than they used to be. Another category is dogs that have orthopedic problems. Pain can cause anxiety and avoidance and aggression. And the third category that veterinary behaviorists see fairly often is allergies, itchiness, skin problems that also can be very irritating and debilitating and may cause the dog to be anxious and aggressive. So who is harmed by aggression? Well, first of all, humans are harmed by aggression because dog bites can be serious. And thousands of people are bitten every year in the United States by dogs, even sometimes fatally. But dogs are harmed because aggression comes at a cost. If a dog is aggressive to people, if the dog bites somebody in the family, it's possible that they might lose their home. And if they lose their home, maybe they aren't adopted into another home and they may lose their life. Aggression is very costly for the human-animal bond. I taught a puppy class for a number of years, and I always asked people what was it that they wanted to get out of puppy class. And very commonly, in fact, they all said, I want my dog to sit when I tell him to and come when they're called and not bite me. Because biting is really what we consider to be a breach of the pact that we have with our dogs. We take care of them and they don't injure us. So it really does harm the human-animal bond when dogs show aggression to people. And lastly, dogs in general are harmed by aggression because we know that the municipalities have banned certain breeds of dogs, certain types of housing that only allow certain size of dogs, and many of these laws and rules around dog owning have to do with the perceived nuisance and aggression factor of dogs. So why are dogs aggressive? Dogs primarily are aggressive to protect themselves. They think something's going to happen to them that they don't want to happen. So they threaten to avoid that encounter. And we know that dogs are very good at threatening. They can growl, they can snarl, they can snap, they put their hair up, they put their ears back, they tuck their tail. So there are lots of ways that we can tell what a dog's feeling. And if the threat retreats, then the fear and anxiety that the dog is experiencing diminishes, which in actuality is a good thing. Now people are going to say, well, if I retreat, then the dog won. Well, then we have the age-old question, can you reward aggression? And the answer is no. You cannot reward or punish away an emotion. And the underlying aggression is the action. The underlying emotion is fear and anxiety. And you can't punish away fear and anxiety. You can't hit a dog and make them feel better. You can't yell at a dog and make them feel better. If you retreat and the dog relaxes, they learn that you are non-threatening. You respect that they're afraid and that they're anxious. They don't learn that it's okay to be afraid. Does aggression have a function? Yes, it has a big function. It changes the outcome of a social encounter, and that is what it is designed to do. It can avoid injury and or death. So if you feel threatened and something bad's going to happen to you, if you can get that threat to go away, you may live to fight another day. Most of the time, animals would rather leave an aggressive encounter than fight, because fighting can result in death. When you change the outcome, you diminish fear and anxiety, and you feel better, and that's a good thing. So why do people get bitten? Why do people get bitten when they interact with dogs? And most often they're bitten because they're not listening. They aren't paying attention. Over the years that I was seeing behavior cases, one of the things that always surprised me, the dog would steal something and go underneath the bed or the couch or the coffee table, growling and snarling and showing their teeth and snapping. And the people reach in and grab the dog and they're surprised that they were bitten. What did they think the dog was going to do? With every tool that the dog had, it was saying, don't do that. Now that's different from the question, should I let the dog have this? Was it a good thing that the dog took this? The answers to those may be no. But when the dog is trying to tell you, don't touch me, really you should respect that, because there are better ways to get back things than reaching in for a snarling, growling dog. Most pet owners don't understand dog behavior. They think a growl or a snap at them is a breach in their contract with their dog, whereas the dog thinks, I'm just telling you, don't do that. And as a sentient being, feels it has a right sometimes to do that. The human emotions and perception of the whole situation often leads people to do things that put them in harm's way. From the dog's point of view, they look at the situation differently. This dog here is frightened by the scale on the floor. It has a submissive lip lick, it's crouched down, its tail is tucked, and has a bit of a whale eye here. And the person is, of course, trying to grab the collar. All of this could have been avoided by simply taking something like Cheez-It crackers or peanut butter Ritz Bits and making a trail onto the scale, and the dog probably would have followed them on, given some time to see that it was not threatening. We don't help dogs that look like that by confronting them and trying to make them do something. Sometimes dogs are aggressive because they don't understand what it is you want to do. So you come at the dog and you grab their collar or you look in their ears and they're startled. What are you doing? Why are you touching me? Why are you making this do that thing? And we have to realize that dogs think of situations differently than we do, and dogs have various levels of flexibility. Some dogs let you do everything to them. Some dogs let you do nothing to them, and most dogs, most things, fall within the middle of that bell-shaped curve. And there are other times when the dog is distracted by something else, like this dog that's looking up the tree, looking for the squirrel that's actually on the backside. If you were to come up and grab that dog by the collar, depending on the personality of the dog and the absorption it has in that event, it might turn around and snap at you as well. So we need to think about how the dog perceives the situation, which veterinarians do, by the way, before we jump in and grab the dog. So what about the human side? Well, humans get a lot of information off of the internet, and a lot of that information is not helpful in dealing with aggressive dogs, especially dogs within the home. Dogs use aggression to change the outcome of a social encounter. They're not out to dominate you. They're not out to get you. They're not out to bite you. What they think is happening to them is unwanted to them. And that's an important way to look at it. Just because we think we're being okay, we think we're not threatening them, doesn't mean that the dog sees it the same way. So one of the things that I tell people is dogs are very persistent, but heaven help us, we should be smarter. So let's say the dog is under the table and has your slipper and you want it back. What I would tell people is go to the kitchen, go in the pantry or go in the refrigerator and get a little cheese. Some dogs will drop the slipper to come get the cheese, okay? You give them the cheese because you're rewarding them. You're not right there when they drop the slipper. What you're rewarding is them to come for the food. And then you lure the dog in another room, you close the door and you go get the slipper and you pledge to keep your slippers out of reach. But that's a much easier way to get back what you need to get back rather than confronting the dog. Humans are really intent on talking to dogs, and dogs don't understand English the way we want them to. Most dogs understand between 250, maybe 1,000 words, maybe 1,500. And then there was Chaser, who by the time he passed away, he knew somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 words. Many of those were identifying his toys. But in general, you can't hold a conversation with your dog. They understand what you do often more than what you say. A good example is I had a Labrador Retriever, and you know they love to eat. So when it was time to feed her, I would say, is it time to feed the dog? And she'd jump up and down and she'd bark and it'd be a whole brouhaha, which I thought was cute. But I could say to her, is it time to weed the hog? And she'd jump up and down and do the same thing because it sounded so much alike. So we can't rely on language totally to be the sole modality that we communicate with our dogs in every circumstance. They understand a lot of what we say, just like we want to go for a walk, or that's why people spell walk. And don't say, no, Dr. Horwitz, I know they know a lot of words. I know they do. But when they're frightened and growling at you, to say, I'm not going to hurt you, may have no meaning. That's my point. And sometimes we think dogs are smarter than they really are. I'm not saying dogs are stupid. Dogs are actually very smart, but we think about them being smart the same way we're smart. And if you want your dog to know how to do things, you need to teach them how to do things. We all think maybe our dog is Lassie, Timmy's down the well kind of thing, but they're not. But they can learn a lot of things, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move along. This is probably the crux of what I'm talking about and one of my favorite slides. Let sleeping dogs lie, people always said. Never bother a dog when it eats, people always said. Do you know how long people have been saying that? That goes all the way back to Chaucer. A long, long time. And guess what? Dogs have not changed. In general, dogs don't like to be bothered while they're sleeping and don't like to be bothered while they're eating. I'm not saying that we can't help dogs understand it's not threatening, but what I'm trying to tell you is that those two sentences are not there because someone thought they sounded good. They're there because in general, especially the way dogs used to live in households, that was thought to be the best way to deal with dogs. And when you think about it, quite honestly, I don't like to be bothered while I'm eating, and I don't like to be bothered while I'm sleeping. Think about if you went to a restaurant and the waiter brought your food and put it down in front of you, and you reached for your fork and they whisked your plate away. And you're going, what? Why? And the waiter said, in our restaurant, you have to sit still for 10 seconds before you touch your food. Would that make sense to you? So we have to understand how dogs look at the world. And if we want them to understand something different, we need to teach them why that's okay. So what do we know? We have a lot of research now about dog and dog behavior and how they interact with families. And this is really helpful for us to understand the human-dog relationship. More dogs growl than bite. And this is good news because we need the growl. When people punish dogs for growling, sometimes they don't growl. And the growl tells us, I don't like this. We need to know that. Especially there are some breeds of dogs that have very low affect in their faces or their tails, or they don't have ears that are very mobile, or they don't have a tail, which don't necessarily allow us to read how they feel about the situation. So the growl is important and we should respect it. It's the dog's way of saying back off. Does that mean we're giving in, we're reinforcing the growl? It doesn't mean any of that. It means that we recognize that the animal's uncomfortable, and it's incumbent upon us to make them more comfortable. About 15% of dog owners in this study were bitten by their own dog. So dog bites within the human household are pretty common. Now, some bites were really nips, some didn't break the skin. There's all different ways to categorize a bite, but owners get bitten by their dogs very often. And the reason for that probably is related to the fact that they don't read signals very well. And if we look at why dogs bite or what are the circumstances that they bite over, the most common reason that they would bite in this study that is from 2001 is over possessive aggression, which now we often call resource guarding. The dog has something they want and they want to keep it, and the owner tries to take it from them. The dog may growl at them, may try to avoid them, and the owner persists, and then a fight ensues. And we all know that when it comes to fighting with a dog and their teeth flashing, you just aren't going to win. What about aggressive behavior in dogs that passed a temperament test? There have been in recent years more studies looking at the value of temperament testing, and very often we're not able to test everything that happens in the subsequent home that the dog goes into because the circumstance in which the testing takes place is fraught with difficulties. And in this particular study, 67 dogs that had been temperament tested were interviewed within 13 months of adoption and asked a series of questions about different behaviors, not just aggression. 40% exhibited lunging, growling, snapping, and or biting after adoption. And when barking was included, the percentage rose to 71%. The results showed certain types of aggressive tendencies, territorial, predatory, intraspecific, were not identified with the testing using the modified version of Sternberg's standardized temperament testing protocol. Are temperament tests worthless? I don't know if I want to go that far, but they only tell us so much, so that we have to arm owners with knowledge of what to look for when their dog is engaging in behaviors, especially aggressive behaviors, that are unwanted. We can help them deal with those and change those without confrontation. This is an old study, and I like it. It's done by Dr. Alana Reisner, one of my colleagues. And what I like about this study is what they looked at is what were the characteristics of these aggressive dogs that their owners felt they couldn't live with them anymore. And they make sense, with the exception of being purchased rather than free. That was a characteristic of the cohort. But the severity of the worst episode, and usually that scared people. The unpredictability of the aggression, either unpredictable when it would happen or how aggressive the dog would be, and the history of at least one multiple bite episode and weighing more than about 40 pounds. And all of these make sense. And we can help pet owners avoid these circumstances with better education about why dogs show aggression and how they can diffuse a situation. What about resource guarding? Some recent research, this is actually from 2018, looked at the factors associated with canine resource guarding behavior in the presence of people. Didn't look at resource guarding in the presence of dogs. Resource guarding was more frequent with rawhides, food, and edible treats. It was also more frequent with slower to ingest treats, but it was lessened by teaching the dog a drop-it command when it was young. So that is one thing, one nugget to take away from this is to help each family with a new puppy learn how to teach their puppy to drop it and how to reinforce that over and over and over. Because dogs are going to get things we don't want them to have. But if they drop it when you tell them to, and then we give them something better, then hopefully no one's going to be bitten. And impulsivity in dogs that were very impulsive, were more likely to resource guard and show some aggression. What about children and dogs? 52% of children that were bitten by dogs were bitten on the face or the head, and almost 3/4 of them knew the biting dog. So children are not necessarily being bitten by stray dogs running around or dogs they don't know. And 52% of the time, the interaction was between the child and the dog, and it was a positive interaction because people always say, oh, the child must have hit the dog, they must have poked the dog. But when we really looked at these, the most common interaction was a positive interaction, touching the dog, petting the dog, hugging the dog, a stationary dog. Never bother a dog while it's eating. Let sleeping dogs lie. Dogs don't like to be bothered at those times. When we looked at another study was done, children under 6 were most often bitten about resource guarding. The dog had something they wanted to keep. The child either came close or tried to take it. Older children were more often bitten in the course of territory guarding. And food guarding to familiar children was also very high. Territorial responses to unfamiliar children was also very high. One of the things there are several things to take away from this. The first is, if your dog has a resource that they want, they should be accessing it someplace where the child can't get it. Secondly, putting your dog out in the backyard with lots of unfamiliar children running around, jumping and screaming must be monitored, because dogs do get excited when children run around and they're pushing and shoving and yelling and throwing a ball back and forth. And if people are counseled ahead of time, watch out the window. If your dog is barking excitedly, chasing the children, maybe they need to come inside. It's not necessarily true that they're having fun. And we can help people assess whether these are good interactions or not. What about training? Well, basically, the outcome of all the studies tell us that if you use non-confrontational training methods, dogs learn faster and are happier than if you use confrontational methods like a shock collar. And if you use different kinds of reinforcements, petting, praise, and food, dogs learn faster for food. So if dogs are going to be paid, they want to be paid in food. That doesn't mean you always have to give them their reward, but you can teach them how to do it and phase out the food rewards and pair them with a good dog. But basically what this is saying is confrontational training, shock collars, choke collars, reprimands is not the best way to teach a dog. In fact, it's injurious to your relationship. Positive training is the best way to train dogs. It doesn't mean that other things don't work, but we know that they also have behavioral side effects. And it's better to teach with positive reinforcement. So how do we move forward? Well, we want to discard outdated theories. Wolves and dogs are not the same. Their genomes are extremely similar, but dogs have co-evolved with us over thousands of years to be different than wolves. Dogs will follow a pointing gesture, and even young puppies will follow a pointing gesture. You can teach wolf pups to do that. It's really hard. It's not innate. Dogs look to us for help. That is innate. That is part of what we raise them to be. Dogs are generally pretty tolerant of humans, and they understand a lot of what humans do. So they're not wolves. We shouldn't treat them like wolves. They're actually very closely akin to us, and we should treat them with kindness, understanding, and positive training. Punishment has no place in teaching your dog anything, because punishment is destructive to the relationship, and punishment only teaches the dog what not to do. It doesn't teach them what to do. And that's where positive reinforcement training comes in. With positive reinforcement training, you are saying, do this. And if the dog doesn't do that, the worst that happens is they don't get a reward. We try again. We make it more simple rather than punishing them. So those are good things to think about when you talk to people about how to interact with their dogs. And that's some of the basis of fear-free. Again, that positive interactions teach dogs that things are okay. This diagram, I think, is really important. And veterinary students and veterinary practitioners out there that ever tried to go into the sheep pen and corral the sheep understand what this means, because you'd walk through the sheep and before you knew it, they were all behind you. And this graphic illustrates the 3 areas at which you need to make a decision about how you're going to interact. The first is the flight distance. And something that is outside this flight distance, usually you're not too concerned about. The dog is not too concerned about, because the dog figures you're far enough away, I can run away if I think you're threatening me. The next is the critical distance. What happens in here, you're a little more worried about because it's getting closer. So if something changes, you've got to make a decision. Are you going to stay or are you going to run? And the third is the fight distance. If something is too close, you might want to fight. And if it happens too quickly, you might want to fight. So what this means is, again, back to the dog under the table. If the dog is under the table with something that you want and you rush right up to it and you start screaming at it, you're going to get an extreme response. If you are 10 feet away and say, okay, Chelsea, come here, you want a cookie? Chelsea may come to you with the slipper and you show them the treat, and they probably will drop it. You really want to lure them away with the treat or throw the treat away from the dog, and they'll drop it and you can take it. You don't confront the dog right where they are, because if you get there really fast, the dog's thinking, oh no, we're beyond that critical distance. Communication is also important. People speak English. Dogs use facial expressions, body postures, and other means of communicating with us, and they think we understand. And it's important to help humans understand that. We need to bridge with a common language. And you know what that common language is? That common language is training. So if you need the dog to come, but you never taught the dog to come, just yelling, Chelsea, come, Chelsea, come, Chelsea, come, doesn't do any good. But if you teach Chelsea when she's sitting somewhere and you step back a foot and go, Chelsea, come, and show her a treat, she comes, you take their sit, give it to her, you back up, Chelsea, come, and you repeat it over and over, Chelsea means, ah. Come means move forward to you. And now you can communicate because you have a common language. And that's really important to explain to people. They have this expectation, because we talk to our dogs all the time, that they know what we're talking about. And they know some words. But if you were saying, let's replace the front walk, that means the same thing with let's take a walk. So they only may have selective understanding. This is something that Eileen in Dogs has a video on it, and she calls it a consent test. You ask the dog whether they want to be petted. So you have the dog where it's not confined or blocked. You pet the dog where it likes to be petted, and usually that would be on the chest. And you take your hand away and see what they do. Does their body posture, their lip licking, turning away, do they approach for more? How can you tell if the dog really wants to be petted? So this is part of that video, which is freely available on the internet for free download. And it would be a fun thing. It's a lot longer than the parts I'm showing you, but it's a fun thing to have in your exam room for them to watch while they wait for you. This is her dog, Zany. And you can see that she's not talking to her, she's just petting her. And most of you can see that Zany's probably not that excited.
In 27 seconds, she did 4 lip licks, 7 head turns away, 2 full body turns away, and 2 shrinking back. All of these are typical signs of stress or avoidance. Here's a different dog.
And you can see the difference right away.
Summer says yes. And yes. And yes again. Summer leaned into me. Her eyes were half shut. Her facial muscles were relaxed. She walked up to my hand whenever I stopped. This is clear communication too.
Other interactions we have with dogs that seem to be benign can make them anxious. So here's a dog that's running away from the owner that has a body harness. Now, why this dog is afraid of that, I don't really know. But we could condition the dog to feel like the body harness is okay and she doesn't have to drag her dog out from under the chair. This is a dog that is upset being approached with the dreaded video camera. So the dog says, oh no, please help me, help me. And we need to recognize that just because we don't think we're threatening them, they may feel threatened. And if they feel too threatened, they may show aggression. And this is something that I'm so glad we don't do anymore. If anyone advocates this for any puppies in your practice, tell them no. This is teaching dogs to be submissive by looking at them and waiting till they look away. This dog just looked away, but she shakes it back and it looks away again. And really, it's damaging for the puppy. Instead of teaching them something, the dog is submitting over and over without being released from being held. So we need to be careful that we are not ignoring their signs that they're uncomfortable. Dogs shouldn't be uncomfortable around us. If we need to do something to them, we should find a way to do it with them in a way that's comfortable. This is something that was created for the first BSAVA Manual of Canine and Feline Behavior. It was designed by Kendall Shepard in 2004. I think that the ladder of aggression is probably not the most accurate description because actually what it is it the steps, the signals that might be shown by a dog as they become increasingly more threatened and stressed. But the fact is that a dog does not necessarily go up them in stepwise order. They can go from this to this rather quickly. And I'm going to show you a video. I've turned off the sound so I can talk over it because it's less distracting without the sound. I'm going to show you a video and then I'm going to show you up the ladder what this dog is doing that they did not recognize. So this dog's name is Jericho. And this is Aaron, the technician. He's already shaking his head. You can see that it's a little dark, but you can see his eyebrows are moving and he's blinking, blinking, blinking. His ears are back. You can see the inside of his ears. So he's not happy with this. He's blinking, blinking, blinking. He's not really very happy, but she's petting him and petting him and petting him and petting him. And they're chatting away on and on about him and what's going on. And she keeps doing it. She's got her hands all over this dog. And he certainly doesn't look happy. And then she steps away. He turns his head away. He turns his whole body away. He walks away. And he barks at her. Okay? He's not saying, pet me some more. He's not. All right? He turns away yet again, but she reaches out and pets him. He doesn't approach her, but she keeps petting. Okay? See how far back his ears are. I can't really tell here if his tail is tucked, but he turns again and he lifts his leg. And these people here think he's trying to pee on him, but he's right here. He is trying to lie down, but he's leashed. He's in a small area. He's a young dog. He's about 18 months old, and he doesn't know what to do. Now he's here. He has not growled. He has not said a thing except for that bark when he sat down. And she continues to pet him and pet him and pet him and pet him. It's a pretty long video. And then he really stares at her. And she says, "What?" And you can see that he lunges at her. So there are a couple of things about this video. I've had this video in my possession, oh my goodness, 10 or 12 years. And it's the best teaching video I've ever seen. When they opened the camera and showed it to me, when I looked at the dog in the first few minutes, I thought this is not going to end well. But there are a couple amazing things about this video. The first is he didn't touch her. He could have ripped her face off. He didn't touch her. He kept going, "Please stop, please stop, please stop, please stop, please stop." He skipped this, and then he went right to this. But he didn't hurt her. The other amazing thing about this video is that he had done this before to her, and they wanted to videotape it to bring it to me. This is a veterinarian, his wife, and their technician. So she did it again. And he didn't bite her then either. I want to share with you what we did for Jericho, because Jericho had a history of being unwilling to greet people and being aggressive when he would be walked up to people. And basically what we taught him, I'm going to do it quick because I don't have much time left. We taught him to unleash with the command, "Let's go say hello," to walk up to familiar people that he liked. And they would ask him to sit, and they would give him a treat, and the owner would say, "Jericho, let's go," and they'd leave. And they did this, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 times. So that Jericho learned that let's go means I'm going to walk up to someone, and let's go say hello meant we're going to go up to someone, and let's go means we're going to leave. And she called me a couple months later and she said, "I have to share this with you. I had Jericho out one day and I said, 'Let's go say hello,' and he didn't move. So I left." And that's what I'm talking about. Jericho knew he had a choice. For whatever reason, he didn't want to say hello to that person. And his owner took him away. And that allows us to be safe with dogs. There's no reason we can't teach every dog, go say hello, sit down, take a treat, and leave. That's the polite way to say hello. But when the dog shows us they don't want to go, at least they can answer in a way that we understand. So we need to give people and dogs tools to recognize when dogs don't want to do something. We need to teach dogs basic cued responses. Sit, down, come with me, go away, whatever ones you want, but that allow you to move your dog from one place to another, and they know them well enough, no matter what they're doing, they go, "Oh, I know how to do that." And you know, for all of us, there's comfort in doing something you know how to do when you know what the outcome is, and the same is true for dogs. This gives dogs and their owners safety, control, and predictability. And you know what? That's all anybody wants, to be safe, to have control, and have predictable interactions. And then understand their limitations. For a couple of years, I did the Ceva Keep the Love Alive bus tour, and we went around the country. The bus went around the country when it went from the Midwest to California. I took a plane. But anyways, we would hold question and answer series with people at like Bark in the Park. The most common question I got was this. People would come up to me and say, they usually had their dog cowering behind their back. "I want to take my dog to Bark in the Park, and he pulls and he wants to go home and he growls at everybody." And I would say, "He doesn't want to be there." And they would say, "But I want him to go." And I would say, "But he doesn't want to." "But I want him to." And we need to understand that dogs are sentient beings, and if they don't want to do something, they shouldn't have to, or we can convince them it's okay. And I don't think that Bark in the Park is something all dogs have to do. The other question was a woman who wanted to take her dog to the ballpark on Dog at the Ballpark Day because she always took her other dog, and the current dog didn't want to do it. Dogs are different. We all know people who will do everything, and some people will go, you know, the list of things I won't do is pretty long. And we should give dogs the courtesy of being able to say no. So where do we go from here? When we have people that have dogs showing aggression, we need to decide what is success and what is failure. Success is no more bites, and failure usually is putting the dog in the same situation without tools to change their behavior or to leave the situation. And we have to make sure that the people's expectations are in line with the reality. So if they have a dog that doesn't like people coming to the house that they don't know, then maybe the best thing to do is to train the dog to be comfortable in a crate or another room when company comes. People say, well, I want my dog to meet people. And it's the answer, your dog doesn't want to meet anybody. I don't always want to meet everybody. So we need to make sure that their expectations are in line with the reality of what their dog can do. We need to educate pet owners on appropriate human-canine interactions. Dogs don't necessarily like to be hugged. I have people tell me, my dog loves to be hugged. And I know that some dogs do, okay? But keep in mind that you can't see your dog's face when you hug them. This dog in here is not necessarily protesting, but he doesn't look happy, okay? Dogs tolerate hugging, some dogs love hugging, but certainly we should tell our children, never hug a dog you don't know. It's not a natural thing for dogs to hug. Teach what you want, don't use punishment. You know, how many ways are there to get it wrong? What, 100, 1,000? How many ways are there to get it right? Usually one. So teach what you want your dog to do. Teach your dog, drop it, so that when they steal something, you can get it back. Teach your dog a robust come command, so when they have something, they'll come to you. Don't punish them when they're doing something that's unwanted, because you aren't going to change behavior that way. This is probably the most important. Always have your dog's back. If you're walking your dog, and your dog doesn't particularly like other dogs, but will walk by them nicely, and people say to you, my dog's friendly, he wants to play, you're well within your rights to say, my dog doesn't need any more doggy friends, and cross the street. If your dog doesn't like to do something, and it's okay with you that they don't do it, don't make them do it. If your dog needs to go in the car, well, we'll teach him how to go in the car. If your dog needs to sit on command, we can teach him to sit on a command. But not all dogs need to go to dog parks. Not all dogs need to go to bark in the park. Not all dogs have to be out in your house when you have 50 people there. So we have to know what expectations we can have with our dog that are in line with the reality of what they can do. And when you're not sure what your dog will do, leave them home. Don't put them in that space. Make sure that you get different things to help you decide what to do and how to teach people. The Blackwell's 5-Minute Veterinary Clinical Companion came out in 2018, and we hope that the new edition will be out in 2024. Decoding Your Dog was written by the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists, and I was one of the authors. It's a great book. We've had rave reviews. You can get it on Amazon, and it goes through all the things I've talked about, how to teach your dog to do all the things you want. Really think about getting involved in Fear Free, because it'll make your clinic day go so much better. It will educate your pet owners. It will educate your staff. And it will allow you to do things to dogs, either whether they have pre-visit pharmaceuticals or using food rewards, that make everybody have a better time at the veterinary clinic. And then you can refer the American College of Veterinary Behaviorists at their website, acvb.org. You'll find a list of veterinarians and who might be closest to you. And some states allow telemedicine, not all states do. So you'll have to figure out whether you are able to do that. If we do that and understand the canine point of view, then people can interact appropriately with their dogs, and we have better and safer interactions with dogs. We create happier, safer, and better bonds. So remember, aggression is a defensive reaction. Dogs vary in how flexible they are and what they're going to do. And if we have appropriate reactions and interactions with them when they feel the need to be aggressive, we can all stay safe and have better, safer human and dog relationships. relationships. Dogs do not mean to be mean. Read the message behind the aggression, forge a better understanding, and preserve the human-animal bond. Thank you so much for your attention. I'll be available for questions, and that is Oscar the dog, who I was able to teach not to guard his food. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Horwitz. What an excellent presentation. We have time for questions. If people want to put some questions in the question box, we'll be glad to present them to Dr. Horwitz for further information.
How do I get to the questions?
I will read them to you as they come in, but I don't see any quite yet.
For me.
I do have a question for you, Dr. Horwitz, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Can you comment on the effectiveness of SSRI in managing aggressive patients?
If you're talking about managing aggressive patients in the clinic, they don't act fast enough to be given on the day of a visit. But in other situations, they do help manage aggressive patients, but the goal is to decrease their reactivity, but the drugs alone don't teach them new tasks. So what's most important when you're dealing with a aggressive dog is to determine what are the triggers, what makes the dog need to use aggression, and maybe rate them from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, and then slowly try to teach the dog to respond differently. If the dog is easily emotionally aroused, SSRIs may diminish that arousal to allow learning to take place. But an SSRI alone is not going to make the dog say, oh, I like strangers now when I didn't before. They really need behavior modification with them.
Thank you. This is probably part and parcel of that question. Is pharmaceutical intervention ever helpful with aggression?
It's only helpful in the context of behavior modification. People often have to change the way they interact with their dog and teach the dog also to respond differently to situations. But there always are going to be some dogs who, for example, don't want you to approach them while they're eating. I like to use food guarding aggression as an example of how we put our spin on something that makes no sense to dogs. How long does it take any dog to eat their meal? Usually it's 5 minutes or less. Now, some dogs are really tolerant about people being around when they eat, and some dogs are not. If you have a dog that doesn't appear to be tolerant, I wouldn't put that dog on an SSRI. I'd put him in a room with a closed door and give him his food and know that within 5 minutes, he can be let out. So sometimes we have to look at how we can change the situation because the behavior might be too difficult to change. I don't believe in, standing next to the dog and taking away their food bowl and do these other kinds of things. Food guarding aggression is actually quite hard to treat because it's not an unnatural behavior for dogs. Maybe
one more question. This question is whether or not you can clarify territorial aggression.
Generally speaking, when we talk about territorial aggression, when we use that term, most people are talking about dogs who are showing aggressive displays at windows, doors, and fences. So that that's one of the reasons that we have dogs, because we like that they bark at unfamiliar things and they regard certain things as their territory. So that, is it a problem? It's a problem if you can't get your dog to stop barking when you want them to, so you need to teach them how to be quiet on command. It's a problem if your dog is barking and also wants to be physically aggressive to people going by. And it's a problem if you don't have any verbal control over your dog. Some dogs are particularly territorial. Some dogs are just barkers. And we've bred dogs to bark at things that they think don't belong there. That's what we want. So I think territorial aggression, territorial response, it is a spectrum from territorial responses that says, hey, somebody's here, to I'm going to kill you if you come up to my fence. And certainly we don't want I'm going to kill you, but most people want, hey, somebody's here. And the best way to deal with that is teach a quiet command and tell your dog to come away from the window. Dogs get a lot of satisfaction out of barking people away, and that's something people discount. If you leave your dog home alone all day and they can bark people away from your house all day, the dog learns that if I bark, they leave, and leaving is satisfactory to them. So territorial behaviors become problematic when we allow them to go on, and that's why people are surprised sometimes when they open the door and the dog runs out and chases people in the street.
That's it. Thank you so much, Dr. Horwitz. Really appreciate your presentation, your time, and all that you do for ACVB. And thank you to our audience. We had a terrific turnout. We will be sending out a quiz and a CE certificate for those who take the quiz, and a follow-up recording. So thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you again, Dr. Horwitz.
You're welcome. Thank you for attending. Everybody have a good evening.
Bye-bye.